Long ball is going to go for a touchdown. The game's over. Webster Trotter.
Beckham will go for the score. Unbelievable.
45-40. Run, William, run. He's got blockers in front. 5. Touchdown. Joshua Cribbs turns disaster into a score.
Sight wants it all on this one for Ovid, and he is there.
Jim Brown to the 30. Jim Brown is going to go in for another touchdown.
The Cleveland Browns select Baker Mayfield.
Wow. It is Baker Mayfield.
I woke up feeling dangerous.
Hello, Cleveland. Welcome to episode number 110 of the 1085 Gridiron Podcast. I am your host, Anthony Joki. Today we have absolutely fantastic guest, Jake Trotter of ESPN. Will be joining us here in a minute, but first, let's bring in my co-host, Jack McCurry of Big Play Sports. How you doing today, Jack?
Oh, I'm doing well, man. Really looking forward to having everyone listen to this interview. It was very great and very gracious of Jake for taking time out to talk to us.
Yeah, it was. He gave us a ton of information. I hope everybody enjoys it. We're not going to waste any more of your time. Here's the interview with Jake Trotter of ESPN. All right, we are pleased to be joined now by Jake Trotter. He is ESPN's new NFL Nation team reporter assigned to the Cleveland Browns. He's been with ESPN for the last 8 seasons, covering the Oklahoma Sooners in the Big 12 Conference. How you doing today, Jake? Thanks for joining us.
I'm doing well. This is my first Cleveland Browns podcast, so I'm ready to go.
All right. I'm glad that we're your first one. We'll jump right into all this stuff. Talk about a little bit as your journey working for ESPN, how it came to be coming to Cleveland, how that transition has been for you so far.
Yeah, my first job out of college many years ago was actually in Ohio, on the other side of the state, Middletown, Ohio, and met my wife when I was in Middletown. She was a Dayton native, went to Ohio State, so we had that connection to Ohio, even though my career took me to Oklahoma City. When this thing came up, even though I had never covered the NFL before. Having a connection to the state, obviously having a connection, covering the quarterback for so many years when he was at Texas Tech and Oklahoma. And then I think, obviously, this is a team that is on the ascension, at least in my opinion. And, besides the fact that I think they're going to be really good, they're going to be really interesting as well. So it was sort of the confluence of events that, led to this position. But yeah, as you mentioned before, I was a college football writer for, 12 years, 4 years at the Daily Oklahoman covering OU football, and then joined ESPN in 2011. Manned OU for a couple more years, and then was promoted to covering the Big 12. And really the last couple of years, just sort of college football at large. But it's been interesting. Like you think of college football and the NFL being the same sport, which I guess it is. Technically, it's still football, but it's completely different in a lot of ways, and it's been fun. Learning the ins and outs of the game, which obviously I'm still doing. I mean, it's going to be, whether we're talking about salary cap or all the analytics tools that are at our disposal now versus college football. It's been pretty cool to try to pick all of it up.
You mentioned that, you covered Baker at Oklahoma and at Texas Tech. What was your first impressions of Baker Mayfield, and what do you think of how he's been so far in his transition from college to the NFL?
Yeah, so I became our Big 12 writer in 2013, and that summer I knew a couple people at Tech. And I kept hearing about this walk-on from Austin, like, oh man, he is crushing it. He's dominating 7-on-7s. But then you hear all kinds of stuff in the offseason you don't really put much stock into because, the preseason arrives and, the scholarship guys, usually take back those positions. But Michael Brewer was hurt at the time, had a back injury, and Davis Webb, who actually, has played in New York now, had gotten ill where he lost like 20, 30 pounds. So they really didn't have anybody else on scholarship who was available. And then you had this walk-on who was tearing it up, in summer passing workouts and then even in the preseason as well. My very first game that I covered for ESPN as the Big 12 writer was a game between Texas Tech and SMU. And the two quarterbacks in that game were Baker Mayfield and Garrett Gilbert, ironically enough. And it was at SMU, and Baker absolutely tore SMU up. I mean, it was just like, man, this guy's unbelievable. You saw him, and especially back then, like, and this is, I'm not complimenting myself here at all, but like if he and I at the time had walked into a room, you wouldn't have automatically known who the college quarterback was, because he just was, physically pretty unassuming. He was like 6 foot, probably then 185 pounds. Wasn't like your prototypical quarterback type, but even then, you could just tell he knew how to play. And he wasn't as animated at that point as you see now. But Baker has always had like just an immense amount of confidence in himself. I remember he decided to leave Texas Tech. He and Cliff Kingsbury fell off the same page when he came back from a knee injury that knocked him out for a good chunk of the second half of the season. And he wasn't really a big enough. He was like the Big 12 Offense Player of the Year, but it wasn't like Jalen Hurts transferring from Alabama to OU. He wasn't that big of a deal at the time. And I remember, there were these like rumors he was going to transfer to OU, and so like I got his number and texted him or called him, and I said, hey, give me a call when you have some time. And I think I was filling in on Sports Talk Radio in Oklahoma City, and he called me in the middle of the show, and I said, hey, let me call you afterward. And I think I did like the first interview with Baker, really, because I don't know that he spoke at all or much at all during that freshman season. And, we did a pretty long, he was really interesting and pretty insightful. And then the fact that he was transferring OU just seemed nonsensical at the time, because Trevor Knight had just beaten Alabama in the Sugar Bowl as a redshirt freshman. Like Oklahoma had their quarterback in the future, and it wasn't my place to say anything, but I wanted to tell Baker, hey man, you're never going to play again if you go to OU. I was sort of expecting him to transfer like North Texas, something like that. But he always believed that, he could do things that other people didn't. Always believed in himself. And like, that was the first moment where I just saw this self-confidence that was very unique in a college football player. And then sure enough, he gets to OU. There's a lot of great stories about him that first year he was there, because like he shows up to OU, like nobody knows who he is. He moves into a freshman dorm with like guys that didn't play sports, waiting for spring football to begin. Played intramural softball with the guys on his hall. And then obviously the next year, wins the starting job. Oklahoma was really struggling at that time. They lost to Clemson in the Russell Athletic Bowl 40-6. He takes over. They beat Tennessee in week 2 in this incredible comeback with he and Sterling Shepard now with the Giants, and they go to the playoff, and it's just been an incredible run for him since then. But my first impression, talking to him, this guy has like so much confidence in himself, and it wasn't cockiness. It was just confidence. And, I think that served him well throughout his career, whether it was at Texas Tech, making the decision to go to OU, or, taking over for the Cleveland Browns, their franchise that, has the longest playoff drought.
You mentioned he has a big personality, and we'll get to Odell Beckham in a little bit. He has a big personality as well. How much of a challenge do you think it's going to be for first-year head coach Freddie Kitchens to keep all these different personalities in order on this roster in terms of, keeping them in check and having a successful season?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I've talked to some people here the last couple of weeks who've worked with Freddie in the past, and I don't think he's going to keep them in check. I mean, I think he's going to let these guys be who they are, which I think will play well in that locker room. The other thing, Freddie appears to be, in my opinion, and then just in talking to people as well, very straightforward. He's going to let you know where things stand. And I think that for guys like Baker, that will mean a lot. Baker's always really valued, guys that are real, not fake. Don't say one thing here and another the next day. And then I think also too, like Freddie doesn't have much of an ego for a head coach. And so it's not like he's going to try to be the biggest star in the room. And I think that'll play well with those guys as well. We don't know how it's going to go. Freddie's a first-time head coach. Odell's new here as well. But I do think there's reason to believe that Freddie's personality will be a good match to these guys. And I think you've already seen it. He's really shown the ability to connect. I don't think Freddie Kitchens is the head coach right now if Baker Mayfield didn't give some kind of endorsement. Odell talked about it during minicamp, how he and Freddie connected because, they're both from the South. Odell playing at LSU, Freddie playing at Alabama. So I think so far I've been impressed. I mean, even with Duke Johnson, first day of minicamp, Duke comes out and demands a trade. Baker says what he says about him, and there's a little bit of tension right there out of the gate on that team. And then you look on the field, and Freddie's got his arm around Duke. So I think he genuinely cares about his players. I think that'll account for a lot. I think he is upfront, which I think will count for a lot. And I think he's kind of a down-to-earth guy, which I think that has a chance to complement the big personalities in that room very well.
Yeah, no doubt that the biggest personality that the Browns have, I would say, is Odell Beckham. Like, he is clearly like a rock star. And now you're adding him to an offense that already had Jarvis Landry and David Njoku and Nick Chubb. Jake, what do you think, on and off the field, do you think Odell Beckham is truly going to bring to this organization?
Well, Odell comes in with a certain reputation, from New York, or even nationally. And I think it's a little bit unfair. He certainly is like you said, he's a star off the field. We saw what he was wearing in the ESPYs with you have to be a certain star to get away with that pouch he was wearing at the front there, with the pocket. But I from everything that I've gathered in my reporting, like, he's always been a really good teammate. Guys on the team love him. He, whatever issues he had in New York, it wasn't with his teammates. It was with, it seemed to be with, management or the coaching staff. And I don't know that Eli and he necessarily had the best relationship at the end, but Baker and Odell certainly do right now, and had a relationship before he arrived. So, from what I've heard, Baker or Odell is the kind of guy that, in the locker room, in the cafeteria, he'll go around and talk to different guys, get to know guys, so he's not a diva in that sense. And I think on the field, obviously he's a spectacular playmaker. He's going to help their intermediate, their deep passing game a lot. But if you're a defensive coordinator, that's the guy you're scheming for. So for guys like Jarvis Landry, you would think that they are going to have, more windows and better matchups in the passing game. You would think the running game will benefit just from Odell being on the field with Nick Chubb and Hilliard and Duke and Kareem Hunt when he returns. So, there's going to be some adversity. And you were talking about Freddie earlier. This is football. There's going to be something that happens where they're going to have to deal with it. And that'll be interesting to see as it relates to Odell. But, everything so far, the guys on this team really like him a lot. And, there's no denying that, he's one of the best players in the NFL, particularly at his position.
How good is this defense going to be? Because it seems like, all the focus is on Baker Mayfield. All the focus is on the rest of the offense with Odell and Landry and Nick Chubb. This defense last season took huge strides in making huge plays. I think we're one of the leaders in the league in turnovers, and they're only going to get better this season. How good is this defense going to be when nobody is talking about them right now?
Well, I think that the additions they made on the defensive line have been overshadowed by the OBJ trade. But you got Olivier Vernon, Sheldon Richardson. And they were already a good pass rushing team before that. Now you got two guys that can really get to the quarterback. I know our Football Power Index projects them to have a top 10 defense, and we'll see. They have some question marks at maybe safety next to Randall, and is Greedy Williams ready to step in the starting lineup? And you will see what they do with some of the depth up front. But I think that they have a chance to have a top 10 defense, and if you have a top 10 offense, I think we all agree, like that's the expectation with the talent and the star power that they have, and you have a top 10 defense, like you're a playoff team. And so, we'll see if there are leaks that spring on this team in places we're not expecting. Right guard is a question mark, for example. But when you really look at the team, there's not a lot of glaring weaknesses, and that includes the defense. And Freddie Kitchens has said he expects the defensive line to be the best position group on the team. I still think it's wide receiver, but they're going to be pretty good up front too, particularly with that starting four. So I think they have a chance to be really, really good defensively. If Myles Garrett takes another jump, look out. They're going to be forced to deal with.
Jake, who do you think is one player that's not getting enough buzz right now on this Cleveland Browns roster that, come maybe the end of preseason or early on in the regular season, everybody's going to be like, man, why didn't we talk about him enough?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think defensively people are talking about Greedy Williams, so I don't know that he fits into that, conversation. A guy that's kind of interesting, the defensive end out of Miami, Chad Thomas. What was he, like a third-round pick last year? Yeah, I think that's right, third-round pick. That's a guy that struggled last year for whatever reason, but a guy that I know they're not ready to give up on, and he could help them at a defensive end. Jannard Avery is a guy I think that they're excited to utilize as sort of a situational pass rushing guy. He's technically a linebacker, but you could see him, in defensive end in some, obvious passing situations. Demetrius Harris is a guy I think that they're excited about. Freddie likes to use multiple tight end sets. I think they ran 31 personnel more than anybody in the league last year, and I think Harris is a guy that they're looking forward to teaming up with Joku. Dontrell Hilliard with the question marks around Duke. I think they feel like he can come in and be a really quality, running back alongside Chubb until Kareem gets back. So, I don't know if I'm forgetting anybody. I think it's interesting to see who the fifth or sixth wide receivers might be. There's a lot of guys in that mix. But, one thing about this team is, it's not hard to fill out a depth chart. There's only one position battle offensively, right? Right guard. Defensively, the defensive line is set. The linebacking core is set. I mentioned, there's a little bit of a position battle at safety and maybe corner, but this team is sort of ready-made in a lot of ways. So I don't know how many opportunities are going to be there for, guys that we're not talking about to factor in, if that makes any sense.
All right, Jake, I know you have to go here soon, and we wanted to wrap up with some quick-hitting questions. 1 or 2 words or maybe a sentence is good enough here. Who is going to lead the Browns in receiving touchdowns this season?
Odell. I think it's got to be Odell. I think we all forget when he's been healthy how dominant of a receiver he's been. And I just think their ability to stretch the field, whether it's off play action, off the running game, I think it's just going to create a lot of opportunities for him. So it wouldn't surprise me if particularly as a, underneath guy, Jarvis Landry still has a ton of receptions, but in terms of touchdown receptions, I think it's going to be Odell.
Will Duke Johnson be on this roster come week 1 of the regular season?
I'm going to say no. Listen, it happens every year. Somebody's going to tear an ACL. Somebody's going to have some kind of injury that's going to create an opportunity. or create a need, I should say, elsewhere at running back. So I think it's possible that he's still on the team, but I think that they, would probably like to move on and go ahead and move forward there.
All right, I'm pretty sure you weren't thinking you were going to get a kicking battle question, but we actually we have two of them going on. Who's going to win the place kicker job and the punter job? You have Greg Joseph and Austin Seibert, and Britton Colquitt and the Scottish Hammer.
Well, you don't spend a fifth-round pick on a kicker if you don't expect him to be your guy. So I think even if the battle is even coming out of camp, I think Seibert is going to be the guy there. I know everybody loves the Scottish Hammer. You probably have to give the nod to Britton at this point at punter. Was there another special teams question, or was that it? I think those are the two kicking guys.
Yeah, that was it for special teams guys.
Yeah.
Jake, what do you think is the biggest?
And another thing, who's going to be the returner? I mean, I think that's another question mark that nobody really talks about much, but they have a lot of, different options there. Maybe not an obvious guy. And I don't know that they're going to have like a specialist guy just does returning. So it's going to have to be somebody that, is in the depth chart elsewhere. But go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're good. What do you think is the biggest area of concern right now on this roster?
I think offensive line is the one thing where you look at this team and say, why would they not be as good offensively as we think they will be? They're solid in some spots. They're really good in some spots like left guard. But I mean, I think tackle is a little bit of a question for obvious reasons. Right guard, they've got a new guy there, whoever that ends up being. And I think that's actually a real competition between Corbett, Kalis, and Cush. It'll be interesting to see, if linebacker, if some of the young guys can factor in, whether it's Mac Wilson or Taki. And I think that I really think Ward and Greedy could be a pretty dominant cornerback duo, but until Greedy does it in a game, you have to wait and see there. But again, I just you go up and down the roster, there's just not a lot of weaknesses. Now I think they have some depth concerns. Defensive line would be one area where I think depth could be a question mark. But I think that this is a team. That's why a lot of people are picking them to win the division. Is there's not a lot of glaring weaknesses on paper.
All right, last two questions. Who is your early favorite to win the Super Bowl, and who wins the AFC North?
I'm picking the Browns to win the North. I think it's going to be tough because, even Cincinnati, I think they have a chance with, my fellow Oklahoma City area native, Zach Taylor, as the head coach there, and, they've still got some weapons. I think 9-7 could maybe even win the division, probably 10-6 though. Who's going to win the Super Bowl? Boy, isn't it hard to pick against Tom Brady at this point? They just always find a way to be a factor. So I'm not ready to give a Super Bowl pick yet because I haven't, I've been so hyper focused on the Browns. It'd be really fun for me if it were Mahomes versus Baker in the playoffs. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Jake, we appreciate the time that you've given us. If you want to let everybody know, where they could find your work on Twitter, where they could find it on ESPN, just go ahead and plug all that stuff.
Yeah, ESPN.com, Jake_Trotter on Twitter, and looking forward to covering this team, and should be a lot of fun this year.
Absolutely, and like I said, we appreciate you giving your time to join us here on the podcast. I'll be at training camp next Thursday, so maybe I'll come find you at some point.
Please do. Yeah.
I will definitely do that, and it was a pleasure having you on, and thank you so much.
Okay, guys. Thank you.
All right, we again want to thank Jake Trotter of ESPN for joining us for that wonderful interview. Hopefully everybody enjoyed listening to that. We were very thankful that he gave us all that time, sit down and talk Browns with us. Jack, as we get on out here, want to go ahead and plug everything you got going on?
Yeah, as always, follow me on Twitter at jmccurrycle and check out bigplay.com where I am writing and contributing there for anything sports related. So definitely go check that out.
As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Anthony Joki. You can follow the podcast on Twitter and on Facebook at 1085 Gridiron. Be sure to follow Jake on Twitter at Jake_Trotter. Like I said, we're very thankful that he joined us and gave us all the time in the world. You can find our podcast on every platform that you can think of: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify. Please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We appreciate it. As we get on out here, I'll leave you with this, and it's the most important thing, and that is, go Browns.